The Great Recession has exposed to public scrutiny the generous pay and benefits that many government employees receive. In February 2011, newly elected Republican governor of Wisconsin, Scott Walker, sparked a national uproar over the legitimacy and desirability of a government workforce. His proposal called for the state's public employees to pay a bit more of their pension and health care costs. It rolled back collective bargaining rights for most government workers, and it took the state out of the business of collecting union dues. The unions fought back. Some 60,000 protesters descended on the state capitol in Madison. Teachers effectively went on strike.
Dozens of school districts around Wisconsin canceled classes Thursday after hundreds of teachers called in sick
in large numbers, and they took their students with them. Doctors showed up at rallies.
Doctors not for work. There are doctors on the corner signing notes.
So these are sick notes for work, so that people can have excuses for work.
We're a group of doctors representing ourselves, not necessarily our workplaces, providing work excuses for teachers or other union members who need them.
We are here writing doctors' notes to support our public employees who have been mentally anguished and distressed this last week and needed to be out here for their mental health.
Democratic state senators fled to Illinois to prevent a vote on the measure. President Obama accused Walker of launching an assault on unions. Nevertheless, after 3 weeks of fruitless negotiations with absentee Democrats, Walker and his Republican colleagues in the legislature forged ahead and enacted significant changes to Wisconsin's public labor laws. Similar steps have been taken by John Kasich in Ohio, by Chris Christie in New Jersey. Other states with heavy unionization, such as Nevada, Michigan, New York, California, and Pennsylvania, are following suit. So why the concern about unions all of a sudden? To learn the answer, one must follow the money. Over the past half-century, unions representing public servants have become political powerhouses. In recent campaigns and elections, they have provided large sums of money to candidates, almost all of it to Democrats, at all levels of government. In addition to money, the unions can provide foot soldiers to conduct get-out-the-vote drives, and they bankrupt states and the federal government in the process. Public unions are now the heart of the union movement. Even as private union membership has dropped over the past few decades, public union membership has risen. In 2009, for the first time, more government employees, 7.6 million, than private sector employees, 7.1 million, belong to unions. This despite the fact that 83% of workers labor in the private economy, while 17% are in the public sector. The main reason for the public union's success is that the political process affords public sector unions much more influence over their members' employers, the government, than private sector unions could ever dream of. Government unions elect politicians who then act as management in negotiations over pay, benefits, and work rules. The result is a cycle that is hard to break. Unions extract dues from their members and funnel them into politicians' campaign war chests. Then those same politicians agree to generous contracts for public workers. This, in turn, leads to more union dues, more campaign spending, and so on. How did we get here? Well, before the 1950s, few government workers were union members. Party machines or civil service rules determined who worked for the government and what they did. Many states even had laws on the books that forbade government workers from joining unions. FDR opposed collective bargaining for public workers. So did the head of the AFL-CIO, George Meany. But in the 1960s and 1970s, there was a rights revolution. It started with the destruction of party machines at the state and local levels. Machine control of government workers increased turnover, because who got jobs depended on election results. Reformers sought to take patronage away and reduce politicization of government work by enacting civil service laws. They succeeded. The consequence was that public employees gained nearly lifetime job security, which enhanced their incentives to organize. At the same time, the alliance between Democrats and organized labor solidified. By the 1950s, Democrats were relying heavily on labor unions for campaign financing and grassroots organizing. Wisconsin passed a statewide collective bargaining law for public employees. JFK issued an executive order which reaffirmed the right of federal workers to organize and bargain collectively. By the 1970s, public sector unions were on the rise. The transformation of unions from private sector to public sector has created a political chasm. Before, the typical union member was a high school-educated white male who lived in a major city. Now, white-collar workers are a majority of union members. Few people today know a private sector union member. That's why by 2009, just 48% of Americans approved of labor unions, the lowest percentage since 1937. Today's union workers don't carry lunchboxes, they carry briefcases to their government offices. The biggest problem with government unions, of course, is that their political power increases the cost of government. Generally speaking, the public sector pays more for jobs at the low end of the labor market, while the private sector pays more at the high end. A few corrections officers in California can make more than $300,000 per year with overtime. One of the reasons that government unions drive the pay scale up is that turnover in the public workforce is very small, and tenure is very long. In 2009, the government worker quit rate, when workers voluntarily leave their jobs, was 1/3 that of the private sector. Benefits are the real cost of doing business with government unions. While pay increases must be factored into the government's budgets each fiscal year, benefits aren't. That means that politicians can kick the can down the road. The result looks like California, where in 2009, the state was confronted with the $24.5 billion budget gap, but had to pay pensions of $100,000 or more to 12,000 retirees. The long-term problem is that government has become too big, too cumbersome, and too expensive. The result is that taxpayers don't receive more government services for the greater costs they are paying. Some economists report that since 1950, state and local spending has grown fast enough to double the size of state and local government every 8 or 9 years. Such growth would be logical if it were improving infrastructure, but that hasn't happened. Spending on infrastructure has been flat as a percentage of GDP since 1950. Employee compensation has gobbled up most of the growth in state and local spending. There are two basic alternatives to fixing this mess. First, we can try to diminish union power by limiting or ending collective bargaining and stopping governments from collecting union dues, as Scott Walker did. Second, we can try to seek concession from the unions. The difficulty with the second approach is that calling for such concessions without touching unions' financial and political power leaves the dysfunctional relationships between public employee unions, politicians, and the government intact. That's why states and the federal government must take a strong stand now. The American people are now learning the dangers of handing over so much governing authority to unelected union officials whose interests are not synonymous with theirs. They must take the next step and pressure their elected representatives to take it back.